to the masjid in a social way, how can they realistically switch that and make it a permanent and meaningful change, especially within the month of Ramadan?
So there has to be a balance, right? I'm not saying I have a problem with programs in general. I think it's important, right? There have to be halaqat al-ilm, you know what I mean? Like there have to be like, durus, and there have to be classes and things like that. And those things are important because it's very difficult for individuals to learn on their own without a guide or a mentor.
True.
So that definitely, that element needs to stay. But I think we have to learn how to be bored, right?
Okay.
And I think that's where we are lacking. Like we don't know how to be bored. We're a bit entitled, and we need this constant stimulation. And we have to learn, like, okay, how do I step away from that, and how do I learn to be bored? Because it's in that space I can learn a meaningful engagement with myself. Otherwise, my mind just stays really busy.
Nice. So some reflective time by yourself.
Absolutely.
Nice, mashallah. All right, so let's jump into the topic, and that is like, this whole thing is called Pathway to Religiosity, of how, you become more mutadayyin and more stronger and steadfast on deen. And there should be a, like a structured growth in your religiosity, and the purpose of Ramadan year after year should be to improve you and keep yourself getting elevated and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How would you define religiosity?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think it can be very subjective for us, but I believe religiosity, there's, I would say, apparent religiosity. So I think a lot of us, when we first start practicing, the first thing we start doing, at least as males, like we'll start growing out our beard, we'll start wearing like Eastern clothing, right? We'll spend more time in the masjid, we'll try to attend more classes, and I think that is a big element of it. And then I think there's that actual inner taqwa that is important, and that's something that only I can judge. I think there are gauges and markers that we can use to help, like, okay, is my taqwa increasing? So all of these things that I'm doing in my prayer and my fasting, my sadaqah, is it having an effect on my heart? I think the easy gauge for that is, okay, well, these things should soften my heart, and it should soften my relationships around me, right? Like I should have a more meaningful relationship with my spouse. I should have a more meaningful relationship with my friends. Those individuals who are toxic in my life, either I've learned to remove them or distance them, if they're family members. So I think that is a nice, easy, personal manifestation and gauge of taqwa.
All right, mashallah. So a follow-up question on that and what we discussed earlier. Let's say like someone really wants to change and they have this thing, but they get overwhelmed with advice, and they get overwhelmed that, okay, you got to do this, do this, do this, do this.
Sure.
And like, everyone would want to become more religious, but like, why haven't we defined like a good, structured, slow approach which is consistent and moving forward? And we see many times, like you see this in the month of Ramadan, people, especially last 10 nights during i'tikaf, and even right after Ramadan, they're engaged, and then they fall off the wagon very quickly.
Sure. There's a difference between making Ramadan the goal and making Ramadan the starting point.
Okay.
I think some of us make it the goal, right? Like, oh, in Ramadan, I'm going to do da-da-da-da-da, versus making Ramadan the springboard into the rest of the year. So I think that perception is one that definitely needs to change, because Ramadan is meant to be a month of recharging, but it's not meant to be a month of worship in Ramadan. It's a show from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for us that, okay, hey, listen, I'm giving you this workshop, I'm giving you this seminar, I'm giving you this time, I'm removing all distractions. So for those of you that might have gone on like a work retreat, like what is the purpose of those retreats? To have like a very intensive, focused time to build certain skills. Ramadan is to build my worship skills. And I know a lot of mashayikh, they'll be like, oh, you should be outside of Ramadan like you are in Ramadan. The blessings aren't there, right?
Yeah,
the blessings of Ramadan are unique to Ramadan.
Yeah.
The fasting in Ramadan is unique to Ramadan. The social environment of Ramadan is unique to Ramadan. The shayateen being chained, like, all of those things, the doors of paradise are open, like the doors of hellfire are closed. Like there's so many unique elements to it. I think that's an unfair gauge. What I would say is that, like, if I had to put it, I would say like it should look something like this, right? So this is pre-Ramadan and this is post-Ramadan. And during Ramadan, I might be like here. Does that make sense? Right? So basically I would shoot up, and then after Ramadan ends, I would come down, but I wouldn't come down. I should be better than I was before Ramadan started. I think that's a better gauge, and it can build a more realistic stepstone into my, I would say, religious evolution.
All right, mashallah. So last week we discussed the topic of Quran. This week we are going to discuss the topic of Sunnah. And mashallah, I don't think mashallah, you're the right person to discuss that topic because for those of you who do not know, mashallah, Sheikh has a master's in Hadith.
Hadith, yeah.
Mashallah. And from Al-Quran. So how would you define Sunnah? So,
Sure.
And let me put this topic and this question in the most layman perspective ever. You get told on the minbar every Friday, follow Quran and Sunnah, follow Quran and Sunnah, follow Quran and Sunnah.
Sure.
Define Sunnah.
So Sunnah is understood in two ways by Muslims as a whole. One is related directly to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ibn Hajar, a very famous hadith scholar, he said that the Sunnah is anything the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did, anything that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, anything that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam allowed to happen in front of him, like tacit approvals. Because it's not possible the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would see something haram and be silent about it. And also any description of his character or his person. So all of these would fall under the Sunnah.
Sure.
The second definition of Sunnah, which is we're familiar with, is like, oh, I just finished Isha, I'm going to pray my Sunnah. Meaning that anything that is above and beyond the obligatory prayers or obligatory duties.
All right. So anything which is above and beyond. So aligning your lifestyle with Sunnah and incorporating those Sunnahs. There are some Islamic lifestyles related to Sunnahs that should be a must, right? Be a merciful person or do not backbite and stuff like that. And then there's a perception that Sunnah is how you dress and how you eat, which is also part of it. But like if you were to put that on a scale and someone's trying to get themselves closer to Sunnah, what would their approach be into this topic or into this?
Sure. A lot of it has to do with perspective. So when we look at religious rites and rituals, we're talking about prayer, we're talking about zakat, we're talking about fasting, hajj. All of these are very categorically and clearly defined by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And like this is how you do this. This is how you should stand like this. This is what you should do in this position. This is what you should say here. This is the dua you should make at that station, right? Like those things are very clear and those things are very defined. The issue when it comes to clothing is that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he gave us guidelines on like, okay, hey, listen, this is the spectrum in which you're allowed to dress. And I had an older gentleman say to me one time, he's like, yeah, but we should dress Islamically. I said, okay, cool. I want to dress Islamically too.
Sure.
What does that look like? And I was like, okay, well, are you talking about shalwar qameez? I was like, wait, isn't this from like the Sikh culture? And he got quiet. I said, okay, oh, you're talking about like the thobe. I was like, oh, like the Coptic Christians wear. I was like, okay. And like you can start going through. I was like, okay, you know what? Let's go back to the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I was like, oh, so you're talking about how Abu Lahab and Abu Jahl dressed?
Nice. Yeah.
Clothing is clothing, and not just that. It's amazing on the other end. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he has a really interesting take on this. He said that you should actually dress the way that the locals dress, right? So why? Because you shouldn't stand out. And I always found this interesting in the sense that here in the United States, Muslims are they're majority immigrants. Yes, would you guys agree? How come it hasn't been taken in large by white American culture? Because it's something that's viewed as so foreign, right? It's viewed as something so different. But when the Prophet ﷺ came to the pagan Arabs, was he like, okay, hey, listen, we got to wear this dress to stand out, and we got to look in this way to stand out, and we have to do these things? Why it's so foreign to white American culture specifically, right? Black American culture is a little bit different, but white American culture specifically is that we brought our entire culture with us, right? So whether you're Pakistani or Indian or Kenyan or like Egyptian, whatever the case might be, it's like, no, I'm going to bring the way that I speak, I'm going to bring the way that I deal, I'm going to bring the way that I dress into this culture. And this is actually against the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very constructive when he came into the Arabs, right? He wasn't like, okay, hey, listen, we got to destroy all this stuff and then we're going to build from zero. He's like, no. these good elements, what we're going to do, we're actually going to hold on to them. I'm going to praise them. I'm going to say these things are good, and we're going to build up on them. So I think that perception of how those things are to be applied, because you have like the sunan that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave in a religious sense, and then you have sunan, things that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam did out of his culture.
Can you expand that further? Like, you know,
Yeah.
this, I forgot the exact term of it, like the two different categories of sunnahs,
Sure.
which are like religious rituals, like
Yeah, yeah.
you Friday, like, you know, sunnah al-rawatib and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And then other sunnahs, which are like more on a broader scale.
Yeah, I mean, use it like sunan urfiya or
Yeah,
adiyya,
urfiya,
or
yeah.
like adiyya.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
these are the fact that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam wore a turban. Is it a sunnah in the sense that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam did it? Absolutely. And if I'm doing it because I love the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I'm not going to be rewarded for that turban. I'm going to be rewarded for my love of him,
yeah.
sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm going to be very clear. And the fact that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam used a miswak, most of the madahib, minus the Shafi'is, you know how they translate miswak? Into a toothbrush. Anything, oral hygiene is how the madahib would translate that. Even though he sallallahu alaihi wasallam used a stick, right? He literally used like the root of the arak tree, and that's what he would use to clean his teeth. So how we translate these things,
Yeah.
I think that's something that's really important. And translate, I'm not talking about like, you know, Arabic to English. I'm talking about into how we translate it into our actions. So how those things translate into our dress, how those things translate into our hygiene, how these things translate, you know, into our lifestyles.
Great. So, like, great, you know, this intersection between sunnah and culture. So, urf is part of our deen, right?
Absolutely.
Like, you know, we incorporate that.
Yeah.
But so many times it gets mistranslated into sunnah.
Yeah.
So, how can, like, someone who's, like, trying to come about, make that distinction, okay, this is just urf and this is what sunnah is?
It requires studying, right? That's the
Okay.
only way to do it. If I'm not spending time and I'm not engaging with the Quran and the Sunnah, you know, by the prophetic statements and the prophetic actions, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and reading, okay, how did the fuqaha translate it? Right? I think that's an important point. That it's very easy for us to open up Sahih Muslim. It's very easy for us to open up Sunan Abu Dawud and just be like, okay,
Yeah.
you know
So
what?
That was my next
Yeah.
question. Like, you know, you hear like, okay, let's study the Sunnah of Prophet.
Yeah.
Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Okay, let me
So-
open up Bukhari. Let me
Yeah.
open up Muslim and like start reading it.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I want to learn that.
Sure.
But that wouldn't talk about the harms of that.
Sure. So I'll talk about the benefits,
Okay,
and then I'll
then
talk
you-
about the harms.
yeah.
So the benefits of that is that you're learning about the Prophet ﷺ.
So,
The benefits of it is that you're learning about him. You're learning how he
Yeah.
spoke. You're learning how he presented himself. You're learning how he dealt with different situations. The purpose of reading Sahih Bukhari or Muslim or Sunan Abu Dawud for the lay Muslim is for barakah. I want to be very clear. The purpose of reading these hadith books is only for barakah. And if you are going to take something from those books, you are going to take character. And those are going to be character traits and etiquettes and manners. That, if you take superficially, if you open up and it says, the Prophet ﷺ said, you know, to smile in your brother's face, and you walk away with that, perfect.
Beautiful.
I want you to
Yeah.
walk away with that.
yes.
If he ﷺ is talking about how important it is to be courageous, and you walk away, I need to be courageous, I want you to walk away with that. He ﷺ says, when you stand, this is the distance that you should have between your feet, and this is the way you can do this, and this is how you should do that. At that point, I want you to read from barakah. You're not going to extract any rulings from it.
But how can a layperson make that distinction? Like,
Yeah.
you know, for example, like, there's not a manual which is given. Okay, that's how you read Sahih Bukhari. That's how you read Muslim or Abu Dawud or something like that. So, and then, you know, like, sadly, you know, that causes a lot of confusion within people, like,
Sure.
you know, where they don't have the right tools to navigate through that book. And then they come and then, you know, you have like questions and practices, and sometimes they go far too in, and then it was like, okay, step back.
My question would be, what is their mindset? Right? So if somebody's coming to me with a hadith, and this happens, right?
Yeah.
Like, they'll be like, oh yeah, well the Prophet ﷺ said this, and they're coming to challenge me, then I'm going to flex. No, I'm being very honest, right? If someone's coming to challenge me, well, the Prophet ﷺ said this, I'll be like, okay, well, he ﷺ also said this here.
Yeah.
These three scholars understood it in this way, and if you look at the madahib, this is the way that they understood this and the way that they extracted it. Here is Hasan al-Basri, and here's Fulan, and here's
Yeah,
Fulan. These are
yeah.
from the tabi'een, and they say this. I want this person to feel overwhelmed and be like, okay, I stepped into something that I had no right stepping into.
Right.
And if someone's coming to me and be like, Sheikh, I read this hadith, what does it mean? Oh,
Yeah,
it means
explain that.
da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
Right? Because he's coming to learn.
Yeah.
But if you're coming to challenge, you're going to get pushed. I'm just going to be very honest.
Right.
And if you're coming to question, I I have questions myself, and sometimes like my children, they do this. They say, Baba, what does this mean? I was like, that's a great question. Let's look at, I was like, honestly, I don't know. Let's look into it.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that's really important. I remember there's a young man, he came to me one time and he's like, oh, what do you think about that hadith? It says something about Adam being created and Allah. Blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh yeah. I was like, oh okay. I was like, this hadith, Ibn Khuzaymah, he uses it in Tawheed and he uses it this way. Imam Nasa'i mentions it like, Kitab, and I could tell he was like shrinking back. He was just coming to test me, right? And he was just coming to challenge me. And I was like, okay, you know what I mean? I can play that game too. It's not.
Yeah.
it's not that hard. But Allah Mustan. Like again, it's the attitude makes the big difference there. If you're genuine and you want to learn, I promise you, there is no imam, no sheikh, no clergy, no academic who will be like, oh, this is not for you.
Yeah.
Why are you reading this? Why are you wasting your time? No one's going to say that. But the moment you come and be like, I saw you do this, and the Prophet ﷺ said this.
And yeah.
Okay, taib. You know what I mean? Let's sit down. You're about to get, you know what I mean?
Masha.
About to get an education.
Allahu Akbar. Anyone ever got it? No, just for the crowd. Be careful when you ask him questions. Okay, another basic question. The word sunnah and hadith, those who have studied, they know how interchangeable they are.
Sure.
But for the layperson, could you expand on that how they crisscross into each other?
Sure. So,
and what's the difference there?
I would say the hadith is something that's connected to narration in general, right? And it could be narrating something about the Prophet ﷺ. It could be narrating something concerning him ﷺ. It could be something that he ﷺ said, versus a sunnah, which is much broader, right? It's a much broader term. It might be something that was just kind of passed down, and even though we might not have chains that are connected to those things.
Okay. So just so everyone understands, hadith is mostly talking about the narrations, and correct me if I'm being wrong, the sanad and all that preservation of it and how it got to us, whereas sunnah is the practice of certain deed that we are doing, and it has been translated into such. Okay, someone wants to study hadith or sunnah. What's their beginning stage?
So, ilm al-hadith has two major categories. You have the ilm al-hadith, which is actually the narrations themselves. And then you have the mustalah, which is hadith terminology.
Okay.
These are two separate sciences. In the hadith part, you'll study sharh al-hadith, right? You'll study mushkil al-hadith. You'll study how to explain those hadith. You'll learn, okay, if you have two hadith that are apparently, there's dissonance between them, and they look like they're opposing, okay, how do I reconcile them? You'll have a hadith about clarifying, okay, well, how do I gather these narrations? How do I explain them? How do I put a little bit of context behind some of those things? I have different sections of okay, these are going to be classified as sound. These are going to be classified as weak. These are going to be classified as unique. These are going to be classified as rejected. You also have a study of different terminologies, right? Okay, how did this terminology come into being? How is it being used? When I open a hadith book and you have Imam al-Tirmidhi says, وَهَذَا حَدِيثُ حَسَنٌ. All right, what does he mean by that? Or if Imam Bukhari, he brings in his Sahih, you're like, okay, well, I see a chain of narration here that goes all the way to Imam Bukhari, but over here he has a very short chain, and it doesn't seem like he's connecting it. Does he mean something by that? You know what I mean? Is there something that's going on there? Imam Muslim, okay, over here he's bringing all of, he brings 4, 5, 6 hadith, and then he brings a hadith in the end where one narrator is adding something to the hadith. Is that intentional? Why did he do that? Is he trying to tell us something? So I think it can be a lot deeper than sometimes we're and a lot of it I think has to do with unawareness. You don't have people speaking on the science of hadith, unfortunately. And it's not that popular. I mean, it's I love it, but I know not everybody. It's not their cup. It's not their cup of tea.
All right. So starting book. Salihin, Arba'un an-Nawawi.
Yeah, those are great, right? So Arba'un an-Nawawiyya is wonderful and is beautiful because basically what he did, he's like, you know what? I'm going to gather 40 hadith, and then Ibn Rajab, he added 12 more. And he's like, okay, you know what? All of these encompass the religion. These 40 hadith, they encompass the religion. I would recommend everybody pick it up, read it, benefit from it. Amazing.
I mean, that's a no-brainer. Everyone, you start, come in, even those who accept Islam, you can pick that up and start reading that,
Absolutely.
There's no, manual that, it's not complex, it's not complicated.
You're not going to be extracting rulings at all. Even Riyadh al-Salihin, what does he talk about? He talks about patience. He talks about fortitude. He talks about courage. He talks about ihsan. These are all things absolutely. Pick it up, open to any page and take from face value, right?
Yeah.
Take it at face value and use it in your life and go forward with it. I think that's a wonderful way to start when it comes to wanting to connect directly to the Prophet ﷺ,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
connecting with his statements, connecting with his actions. If I want to have a hadith interaction and dealing, those are the books I definitely would start with,
right.
100%. In English, for hadith terminology, there are a couple things I'm working on.
Okay, mashallah. Yeah.
One of my mashayikh, Sheikh Hatem al-Audi, he has a book called Al-Usus al-Aqliya. So basically, what was the rational means in the rational way that the hadith scholars came up with a system to grade a hadith.
Yeah.
I think it's wonderful. My classes are available online. Like I've actually taught the book a few times. For those that are interested, I can share it with them. And he has a very small book, Khulas al-Jarh wa Ta'dil, right? So it's a discussion of like, okay, how do I deal with narrators? When and some of you might be familiar where like you open up a book, all it is like a list of names. It's like, oh, where this person lived, who his teachers were, who studied from him, what did the different critics say about this person? Okay, how do I deal with that and what does that mean? So I think those two books are wonderful introductions to the science. I think that's like the rational methodology to hadith sciences by Sheikh Hatem, excellent, and Khulas al-Jarh wa Ta'dil also.
Does anyone heard of that name, Sheikh Hatem al-Auni? Okay.
No.
MashaAllah, great hadith scholar, living legend, MashaAllah.
Yeah.
And you're fortunate to study
No,
with him.
I was very fortunate to study with him. May Allah bless him and preserve him. Like amazing human being.
So stepping away from it in a different range, talking about makanatu sunnah, like there is a growing trend of sunnah is optional, hadith is optional.
Yeah.
It's okay if we take it, if it's okay we don't take it. Then we step into the hujjah of it, like it's an evidence-based science within our deen.
Sure.
And this growing trend of like TikTok influencers who are like, or in Quraniyun, who are like, you know what, let's focus on Quran. So how do we tackle it? And then and I'm asking all these questions from a perspective, okay, I changed. I'm serious about studying religion. I want to go in depth. I want to move away from this cultural, social vibe that, okay, everyone was following deen. I was going for Jummas. Now, okay, I've become serious about deen.
Yeah.
And I'm being hit with all these different things. I want to navigate this.
So I will say, like, epistemologically and ontologically, and this is something that applies across the board. If I'm trying to convince I don't want to say opponent, but somebody who disagrees with me, right? So if I'm trying to convince someone who disagrees with me, it's important for me to use their tools to bring them to my side. An example of this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when I address a non-believer, is the first step to make him believe in the Quran. If a person doesn't believe in Allah, and I say to them, okay, hey, listen, you need to believe in Allah, and he's like, why? And I was like, because the Quran says so. Is that going to work? Why? He doesn't believe in the Quran, right? Like, he doesn't believe in Allah, let alone the Quran. Yeah. How does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell me to treat this person? How do I bring him to that stage? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, he's like, look at the world around you. Right? Why? Because this is something that's shared between us, right? So that shared reality of the world around us saying that, hey, do you think this sky, do you think these trees, وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ, do you think yourself, like, all of these signs are there. Do you think this happened by chance? Vast majority of people will be like, no. Like there was intelligence that's behind this. There was a purpose that was behind this. After you bring that, it's like, okay, well, if that same being gave you all of these physical provisions and he's given you all of these social provisions, he's given you all of these tools, would he not give you spiritual guidance as well? Yeah, well, you know what? That makes sense. Now, what would I do? Now I would introduce the Quran and say, okay, cool. Here, this is what I feel is right, and let them engage in that way. When it comes to hadith in the Quraniyun, so what is their one source? The Quran.
Yeah.
My response to them, وَمَن يُطِعِ الرَّسُولَ فَقَدْ أَطَاعَ اللَّهَ. Right? Whoever obeys the messenger has obeyed Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, أَطِيعُ اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُ الرَّسُولَ وَأُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْكُمْ. Right? Obey Allah and obey His messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He Azza wa Jal, He also tells us, وَإِنَّا لَهُ حَافِظُونَ. What was the beginning of the ayah? إِنَّا نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ. إِنَّا نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. That we're the ones that sent the reminder and we are the ones that are going to protect it and preserve it. So it's not possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send the Quran
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, well, you have to pray these salawat and you have to give this zakah and you have to make hajj. Are the details of how I do those things in the Quran? There's some isharat, right? You know what I mean? Like, there are indications here and there, like, okay, well, there's a sajda that's mentioned here and there's a ruku' that's mentioned there. But where do I get that there's 4 rak'ah of dhuhr from the Quran? I don't, right? It's not there. Or on what days am I supposed to make? Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that I make hajj in which month? In Shawwal, right? No.
أشهر معلومات.
Right? I make it in Dhul Hijjah, right?
Yeah.
But does he specify which days? So yeah, there's some indication, like indirect that you have there, but you don't have that clarity. All of that clarity comes from the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right, and he's meant to be a manifestation of the Quran. Like, okay, hey, listen, this is how you understand it. This is how you deal with it. Even certain verses that are unclear, right? Even some ambiguity, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he clarified them. So I would say, okay, well, you're saying that this is your main proof. Okay, well, it's saying that I have to follow him sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So how do I do that? Why would Allah send an incomplete message?
Beautiful.
The second argument I like using is like, okay, well, you don't trust the Sunnah because historically it could have been lost, right? This is the argument. Like, oh, it could have been lost. My question is always like, okay, well, who brought us the Quran? When was the Quran recorded?
And
As a whole. Was it recorded in the time of the Prophet ﷺ? No, it wasn't. It was recorded after his passing. Wow, guess what? Was also recorded after his passing. The Sunnah. So if you have doubt in the Sunnah, you are implicitly also having doubt in what? In the Quran. So that's
the reliability of narrators you're questioning, and the preservation method and whatnot.
I'm saying like, if you're going to doubt the companions, then you have to doubt them across the board.
The whole thing,
It's like no.
It's
like no. They were good with the Quran, but they failed in the Sunnah. Like it doesn't make sense. Like there has to be a level of consistency that's there. So I think those two are probably the strongest arguments that I like using concerning that. If anybody would like more details in like the compilation of the Sunnah, Mustafa al-Alami, excellent work. He has a compilation of the Sunnah, which is actually has been translated into English. He did a wonderful job with that. But it basically he breaks down the timeline. So like, okay, well, how did that look? How did the Sunnah actually become compiled? It's a beautiful discussion of how it makes sense and how the science of hadith actually has been preserved.
Beautiful. I have some more questions. So I know you said we will touch on the topic of bid'ah as well, but I think that requires you to come for another time.
Yeah.
But I want to leave like questions for you guys. Like you guys should ask some questions if you guys have any. Like really, whether that's related to this topic or any other topic.
Or is the fast starting to get to everyone? Is it close to iftar now?
Yeah, it's like around 10.
Everybody's
7 minutes.
Everybody's got like 7:16 in their head right now.
Yep. Any questions? No? All right.
Yes.
I think you guys talked about the difference between Nabawi and but I didn't twist it differently exactly. I think I'm always wondering, there is 40 hadith Nabawi,
Yes.
and then there is the hadith Nabawi. Even Google, you didn't convince me to understand it differently.
So hadith an-Nawawi, right? This is Imam Nawawi's compilation of hadith. He took 40 hadith and he put them in a book.
So based on the Imam who wrote,
Yes, that's it. So, yeah. So, for example, Sahih Bukhari. Why is it called Sahih Bukhari? Because that's the condition that Imam Bukhari put. He said, you know what? I have all of these ahadith. What am I going to do? I'm going to take this one, and I'm going to take this one, and I'm going to take this one, and I'm going to put it into my book. He clearly didn't name the book after himself, right?
And he didn't name it Sahih al-Bukhari too.
Right. So the name of the book is actually Al-Jami' al-Musnad al-Sahih, right? That's the actual name of the book, where he's like, okay, this is my compilation of ahadith that are sound, and he calls it al-Mukhtasar. He says that this is the summarized version of it. But even Arba'in an-Nawawiyya, I don't think he called it after. He didn't name it after himself. He just called it Al-Arba'in.
I think it's Arba'in fi Usul ad-Din or something.
Yeah, fi Usul ad-Din. It's like, it's called Al-Arba'in fi Usul ad-Din or something like that. Like, 40 hadith concerning the foundations of the religion. He didn't name it after himself. These are all names that we came up with to make it easier when we went to reference them. I think the question might be the difference between a hadith al-nabawi wa hadith al-qudsi.
This.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, hadith al-nabawi is any statement, action, tacit approval, description of the Prophet's physical or his character. A hadith qudsi is anything that the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah said.
Well, that brings me to another question.
Yeah. What differentiates it from the Quran?
Exactly.
It's because the Prophet ﷺ didn't say that this is Quran. That's the simple answer.
Can say it because he get the ihab from Jibreel.
Uh-huh.
He heard that, but he didn't indicate that Quran.
Bas. That's the difference. The difference is that if he says sallallahu alaihi wasallam that this is Quran, and if he didn't say it, then it's not considered Quran.
So that the hadith qudsi are different than no.
Yes,
Nabawi.
absolutely. Yeah. You can say it's a type of hadith because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's the one who's speaking. Does that make sense? Because he sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the one that's speaking, he's speaking on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah.
Do you suggest any book in Arabic?
Yeah.
Can include the hadith qudsi and explain
So I don't know any that explain them because even at Hadith al-Qudsiyya, if I'm being honest, most of them are weak or fabricated. أكثرها إما ضعيفة وموضوع أحاديث القدسية. There are a few that are sound. The Hadith of the Wali, I think, is very fundamental, is very important. يعني من عاد لي وليا فأذنت له بالحرب. I think this hadith is monumental. I think it's very important and pivotal to our religion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, this one I'm not familiar with. But I would say the other one is that the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he's speaking about a sawm, where he said a li wa ana ajzi bi. This is something that is also, I think, it would be a fundamentally important hadith qudsi. The rest of them, like I said, take them with a grain of salt. Yeah. Yeah.
Any questions from the brothers? Yep.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, you're saying no. I don't have a question. Okay. It depends on the question. But go ahead. Uh-huh.
Beautiful question.
Oh man. Yeah. I'll try to keep it short as possible. So I was one of those, like, starting to practice means like I have to grow my beard and like I have to dress like this. Right, that was like my first trajectory. Like because you know what? It's the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
Right? Like, okay, how do I show that I'm religious? I show by religious by dressing religious. That's the easiest thing to do. And even though like I was a pretty difficult person, right? Like in my interpersonal reactions, I was like really, really difficult. I think it's gotten a little bit better, but I was really challenging. So I was like, man, was I really, practicing the right way? And when I started practicing, one of my first exposures, like the reason I started practicing like religion was because of my engagement with the hadith. Right? That was the first thing. Where the Prophet ﷺ, he said the difference, or I want to translate this in a way that's meaningful, that the veil between the Muslim and the polytheist is the salah. And I wasn't praying at the time. I read that hadith, I started praying immediately.
Inshallah.
And from there, my interest in hadith only grew. I was eventually exposed to the works of Nasruddin al-Albani. And I was so influenced by him and his writings and like his work on hadith that became my passion. And I was just like, I want to study hadith, and I just continued studying it. Interestingly enough, I don't agree with a lot of his conclusions now, but I still, for sure, يعني له فضل علي, right? Like he has he has a virtue over me in bringing me to where I am and in giving me that passion. Yeah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on him.
Ameen. Yes, question.
The difference only comes from rawat al-hadith. So in some hadith, وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وفي بعض الروايات قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. This is something that we got from the companions. I think it started from there. And I think من باب الاختصار, like just to keep it short, they just call it hadith, hadith nabawi, بدل instead of hadith.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر.
The sunnah is
أشهد
based.
أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.